Hello, and welcome to the Classicist Podcast from the Hoover Institution. I'm your host, Troy Senek, here, of course, with Victor Davis Hanson, the Martin and Ely Anderson Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution. And Victor, I want to turn us today to a theme that you've mentioned occasionally in previous episodes of this podcast, and one that you've now developed at more length in a recent column. And that's a growing sense of alienation amongst a lot of Americans. And we should be clear here up front, this is more than just you saying that there are lots of people who don't like their choice between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, even though that may be a little part of this. But this piece that you've written is in some ways just as much social analysis as it is political. So why don't we do this? Before we get to how this manifests itself, why don't we talk about where you see it? Because a lot of this for you comes from your personal observations. What kinds of people are feeling this alienation? And are there certain precincts of society that are more resistant to it?
Yeah. Well, I wrote that column based on autopsy and when I was at Hillsdale in southern Michigan. And then I did a little lecture tour of rural California, places like rural San Luis Obispo County, Ventura. And then, of course, I was speaking to some farming groups in Fresno County and then where I live on a farm. And I guess I would sum it all up as saying the people who are the most alienated, that talk about their guns being taken away, obviously, and the Supreme Court, are males. They tend to be more white and older. But also a lot of females that are worried about abortion, but in the other sense of they don't like it. And then religion, they tend to be more religious. And then I have a lot of people I went to high school who are Mexican-American, and they're all voting for Trump, which I think is a minority of that population, that community, but it's nevertheless. And the reason they're all doing this, all these different groups, they feel that they're isolated or alienated from popular culture, journalism, the trends and the trajectory in which America's headed.
So let's talk about some of the defining traits here. You say in this piece that alienated Americans, and this is a quote from you, embrace a pessimistic view of the country rather than the therapeutic view shared by most Americans, close quote. So, Victor, there are people amongst the non-alienated who we could also say have a pessimistic view of America insofar as they view it as fundamentally tainted, maybe because of racism or capitalism, sex, take your pick. Yeah. But in this instance, you're talking about a different kind of pessimism amongst this alienated group, right?
Yeah, I think they feel that the logic by which they run their own lives and businesses is timeless and for the ages, and the country no longer follows it. So if a guy has a 7-Eleven business, or he's an independent trucker, or he's a small farmer, he knows he can't borrow 140% of his equity, or something like he sees happening on the national level, or he understands that he can't treat people in his business as daily interaction by their tribe. In other words, that race is essential rather than incidental to their personas. Or when he looks at popular culture, he knows that I was just looking at a story about Jennifer Lopez performing in Florida for Hillary Clinton. 40 years ago, we would have called that, burlesque. It would have come out of the Tenderloin in San Francisco. So they see stuff like that, and they say, in my own life, I just can't do that stuff. And things wouldn't work if everybody were to do that. And the country now has embraced an alternate worldview that's not sustainable culturally, politically, socially, financially, economically. And they look at entitlements, they look at Social Security. And, 3 nights ago, I was talking to this woman I know very well at Walmart in Selma, and she's a second-generation Mexican-American. She said, you never believe me when I keep telling you that people come in here with new Camrys and Accords, and they have electric EBT cards and WIC cards and all this stuff, and who's going to pay for it? And just as she said that, I looked out the window and a woman walked in with a Mercedes and came into our area, and she said, since she's another one. And it doesn't matter whether it's accurate or not. There's just people who believe that the system is not going to have enough resources for the number of people who want them. The pensions, debt, People don't feel that if you put money in the bank, that was the old idea of being thrifty and you played by the rules, you're going to get zero interest. And then some financial guru says you're an idiot for saving money and putting it in a passbook. You should do X, Y, and Z. And this alienated American said, wait. My dad, my grandfather, we always said, save money and get 4% in your passbook, or take it to the savings and loan and get 5%. And so the rules have just been, and then they look at, healthcare, and they think everybody's worried about not having coverage. But as I was saying last time, when I have been into these doctor's offices because of a recent accident, people are not using their healthcare. They're either paying cash or they're not going to the doctor because they don't feel that they could ever pay the yearly deductible of $3,000 to $5,000. So their attitude is, I'm just not going to go to the doctor because I'll have to pay for it, and then I'll just use it if I get a heart attack or something. But otherwise, I'm just going to just go to a doctor I like and pay cash, or not go at all. So it's had the opposite effect of excluding people from the system. So all of these things are getting bewildered, and they look at Colin Kaepernick and not standing, or they look at Beyonce at the Super Bowl and they say, I just can't relate to all that stuff. It's not race, it's not age, it's just the messaging is, I guess I would sum it up from what I can distill is, if everybody doesn't like the system so much, then why are they so wealthy, or why are they content to be here? Or what is it about the United States that draws immigrants in or makes people have such opportunity, and why, therefore, do they hate it so much? Or at least they don't contribute to it, or they don't build it, or they don't invest in it. And so I think that's the problem. And I don't think it's the majority. I think it's about 45%. But it suggests to me that Trump brilliantly saw that. And so he got on trade, he got on immigration, he got on outsourcing, America Great, and all the other candidates and the elite said, what an idiot. And yet they ended up being more like Trump than Trump was like them.
Yeah. To that point, there's a passage here in this piece that I have to get you to expand on, considering the political dimension here. You wrote that to the extent that Trump wins sympathy among estranged Americans, it's largely because he represents the nihilistic choice. Explain that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people at this point just want to be heard. And they like the idea that they can go to a Trump rally and yell, or they like the idea that Trump will say anything, is capable of saying anything at any time, and that makes people enraged. So a lot of his attraction is that if they happen to go through a major network, or they're driving and they listen to a public NPR, not that they do, but to the extent they come into the mainstream media and these people are outraged, when Obama goes around the country and says that Trump represents an existential global threat, they like that. And they think, you know what, it's time you heard people what they think of you people. And I think it's kind of a way of saying, we don't have your power. We didn't go to Yale. We're not lawyers. We don't get Botox and go on TV. But you know what? It's time for you to hear that people don't like you, and they don't like what you represent, and they don't like what you do. And that's a lot of his attraction. He's sort of getting back at people. And so he kind of created his own paradox, because he won the nomination on being crude and, as I said, edgy, and then he realized that he couldn't do that to pick up 51% of the population, so he's kind of toned it back now. And you can see how he struggles with it when the other day he said, I have to be nice, Trump can't say this, Trump can't say that, and the crowd loved it, but he was kind of making fun of his own paradox.
There's, in this piece, a pretty bleak passage where you say that the disengaged Americans' own existential business is survival. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think they look at the world around them, and I'm talking about the middle class, and they said, I don't qualify for any subsidy. I don't qualify for I make, a family of 6 or 5, we make 130 or 140,000. We got a good job, but we live in an expensive state. I'm just being a hypothetical now, and they think I don't get an Obamacare subsidy. The thing went up, 30%. My kids want to go to college, but they don't fit any of the rubrics that the universities want to invest in and subsidize. So I would like my son to apply here, or my daughter for this type of job, but there's no special consideration given. So I lack the pull, the influence of the old boy network, of the rich, the legacy network, the Harvard, the kind of stuff that we saw a glimpse in with the Podesta and Colin Powell emails. But I don't have the romance of the poor. I'm not of the particular tribe that allows me to have affirmative action or set aside. I'm just the kind of amorphous people that in between that nobody really likes and nobody really wants to help. And yet I get up every morning and go work. And I do this, and I can't. And they turn on the Ferguson, or they turn on Baltimore. And I said, I can't do that. I can't. I'd have to get to work the next morning. I couldn't afford to do that. Or when they listen to Colin Powell name drop the Hamptons or the Bohemian Grove, that's just a world I don't know what it is. I don't know that world. And they read about all this stuff, so they feel they're in between and they're ignored and they're shrinking. And I think they're right. I think we're becoming a pyramidal society of an elite on top and a subsidized other on the bottom. And these guys in the middle feel that they're threatened. That's why you hear, I try to listen to talk radio, not because I necessarily enjoy it, just for columns to write about. And I was driving home today and I listened to about 6 of them, and they all say the same thing. I don't know if they're on cue or what, but they all say, this is the election of the century, or last chance. And they feel that if they don't get a spokesman, the cosmic forces are aligning against them for good.
You identify a dynamic in this piece that a lot of our listeners will probably recognize from their lived experience. I know I do. About political correctness. And you paint a picture here amongst the alienated of people who don't like it, but who as a functional matter see their primary responsibility not so much as combating it, but as evading it. Tease that out for us.
Yeah, I was talking to a couple of friends of my son, and he's a teacher, and they were basically saying, there's about 9 things you can't say, even inadvertently, or you're going to lose everything. And they meant by that your house, your job, your income. And there's certain things you can't say or do that were considered normal just 40 years ago. And I'm not talking about racism or sexism. I'm talking about what falls under the category of microaggression or that kind of university thought crime. And I know that being an academician now at a research institute, there are certain things I have to be very careful about. I try to be very careful. And what I mean by that is, Troy, if I were a uncouth person and I wanted to make fun of Christians or Mormons or abortion restrictionist or any of those people, I could do it very easily, and I would have no consequences whatsoever. And I'll go one step further. There will be no consequences for Donna Brazile, other than leaving her CNN, which she had to leave anyway, for saying she helped to rig a debate. She's not going to lose the DNC chairmanship over that. And John Podesta is not going to lose his job because he was a clearinghouse for talk about being needy Latinos or making fun of African American names. That's okay. So what this estranged person says is, political correctness is not a process to make sure that we treat each other equitably. It's a rigged game in which there's people who are minorities and women and supposedly disadvantaged groups, and they can say anything and there's no consequences. And then there's another group who are leftists, and it's like buying a life insurance policy. They are loud about their progressivism, and then that means that insurance policy says if you slip up and say something uncouth of the sort that is found in the Podesta archive, there's no consequences, because that's not a window into your heart, a glimpse into your soul. It's just a gaffe. Whereas if anybody else says that, you're all through. So, when Michelle Obama said it's a downright mean country, or she said, I've never been proud of it till Barack was nominated, who cared? that was contextual. When Nancy Reagan years ago said, you know, she came into a snowy area and she saw a bunch of white faces. She goes, "Look at all the white people." Or, "It's good to see the." That was terrible. So I think that's what people are reacting against, not political correctness per se, but the distortions and the warping of it, that it's not consistent.
To that point, here's the last thing I'll ask you. The word you're using here throughout this column, alienation, is usually interpreted as a negative, right? If you hear that someone is alienated, the instinct is supposed to be to bring them back to the fold. But how much are these patterns that you're identifying maybe even accelerated by the fact that the culture these Americans are alienated from is one that increasingly seems like it would rather not have them on board anyway?
Yeah, I don't think... I mean, you can see extreme manifestations when people kind of go haywire, like the Bundy clan, that are pretty not sympathetic characters. But you can get the idea that the larger culture just wants to... I don't know. I mean, if I'm reading some of these columns about Trump, I read some of the column, you know, it's not just enough to defeat Trump. We have to obliterate him. We have to destroy the Republican Party. We've got LA Times guy Days tweeted, "We got to kill him, or he should be dead." So you get the impression there's a lot of anger at these people, that they're sort of a road bump into a highway, a utopian highway, a trajectory into peace and love and perpetual kindness, and that if you would just get rid of them, or they would just disappear, they'd go back to Idaho, or they'd go into southern Utah, wherever they go, just get out of our way and let us do this. But and that's kind of scary. And so these people sense that people really can, most of America can live without the Second Amendment, they feel. And they do things. Most people can live without farming, they think. Most people can live without miners, they think. Most people can live without frackers, they think. And the people engaged in these productive, muscular, entrepreneurial activities feel, you know, gosh, we're the guys that fuel Palo Alto. We're the guys that fuel the Upper West Side, and yet we're just thought that we're superfluous. So that's where a lot of that anger is, and it's kind of manifested now into a realization that they're no longer the majority. I'm not talking about race. I'm talking about mostly where you live and what type of activity you're working in. They feel that they're not the majority anymore, and the people don't like them. And their attitude, instead of trying to appease it, is sort of screw you. I could care less. I kind of got some of the influence, because this happened in Athens in the 4th century BC after the Peloponnesian War. The democracy, which had been really responsible for the recklessness that lost Athens the war, doubled down. So they started not just paying people to go to the theater, but paying people to vote. They went after wealthy people, and every lawsuit you read in the 4th century Athenian corpus of forensic speeches is all about, he has more money than he's letting on, let's get his inheritance, etc. And so there was a whole group of philosophers, Plato one, later Aristotle, that dropped out, so to speak. And when you read them, Euripides has a archetype in the Ion, another play, and they just don't participate in the democracy. They're critics. They're kind of irrelevant. Every once in a while, when they try to stage a coup or something, it's carnival. You know, it doesn't work very well. But they're the voice that's actually survives from democratic Athens, the antithesis to it, and they just completely drop out. They don't want to participate in the civic life of Athens anymore. And that's, I think, what the dangers of democracy, that it creates this sort of mob-like culture, and everybody has to be part of it. And if you feel it's headed in the wrong direction, it's not enough to be in the minority. You have to be destroyed psychologically or something. And I see that a little bit. I don't want to be a wounded fawn, but I see some of the never Trump rhetoric that I'm reading. So if I read some things that have been written lately by Gabriel Schoenfeld in New York Daily News, or Robert Kagan in the Washington Post, or David Frum, the theme is you people should be ashamed of yourself. You have to apologize. We don't know if we'll ever take you back in the Republican Party. And it's that same idea that how could you, I think I'm quoting directly, how could anybody in New York ever align themselves with somebody like these Trump people? And I just don't think that's a good thing to do, because I think we're coming to a crisis that the next president's not going to be able to, whoever it is not going to be able to unify the country after this election very easily. And the Republican Party is going to see a mini civil war. I think that's inevitable. So I'm not, and I wish it wouldn't happen. So one of the things I try to do is when I discuss these issues in print, even though some people really bother me, I don't know if that's cowardice or what, I try not to mention them by name, because I don't want to, I don't mind getting a fight with them. I'll be happy to go back and forth with them, but I just don't think it's helpful to say the people I just mentioned, I'm not really angry at. I just wish they wouldn't use that rhetoric. And I think it'd be wiser if everybody toned it down a bit, but maybe that's impossible until the election's over.
All right. Well, then the next show we'll know who that next president will be. And in the meantime, to our listeners, you can stop by hoover.org to read all of Professor Hanson's commentary. We'll see you back here soon. For Victor Davis Hanson and the Hoover Institution, I'm Troy Senek. Thanks for listening.
This podcast has been a production of the Hoover Institution. For more information about our work, please visit hoover.org.